Okay, welcome back to members of a 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and to our ongoing study in G.W. Hegel and his Phenomenology of Spiritual Self-Consciousness. This is going to be the 11th lesson in this playlist. This will conclude the playlist, which basically is my graduate level seminar for G.W. Hegel. Say if you were taking the Hegel seminar at TCU, this is my graduate level seminar for that seminar. And if you notice, we began with the ending because the first two lessons were the summary of the entire phenomenology, and we're ending with the preface. And that is exactly the way that Hegel wrote it. He wrote his phenomenology demanding that the reader know his entire system before they turn to the very beginning, even before they start. And he wrote his preface at the conclusion of his manuscript. So we're going to take a look at the preface, and it's going to be concentrated on paragraphs 1 through 15 in the preface. And it's our final lesson in the graduate seminar on Hegel. It will conclude this playlist of 11 lessons. Now, if you notice, we've got the same triad: logic, essence, and spirit. So let's go to block 1 and take a look at logic. The first sphere of spirit, philosophy moves in itself as the element of universality. It does include the particulars that will be taken up and transformed, and it is a movement called the demonstration of truth, a progressive unfolding of spiritual truth. The second sphere of spirit is the going out for another as the progressive unfolding of spiritual truth, unfolding as Aufheben, becoming through the process of negation. The emerging form of truth supplants the former form. So it's a process of negation and preservation. Aufheben. Or, if you will, Aufheben. Some people call it Aufheben. I always say Aufheben, but it's negation plus preservation. That which is sustained is a fluid organic unity, a fluid organic whole. The third sphere of spirit is the return moment of the life of the whole which is a return for the self and for self-identity, which must be maintained in its freedom. It's supposed to be a return of freedom, and it is a reciprocal necessity of positing and return, and that is Hegel's dialectic. Hegel's dialectic is a dialectic of positing and return. That gives us our logic in block 1, and now we move on to essence in block 2. Okay, let's take a look at essence. The essence is the second sphere of spirit as the progressive unfolding of truth, the guiding tendency of spiritual cognition. We must reach actual existence of the true, and we must first surrender completely to the real in order to apprehend genuine spiritual substance. Initially, we search out the general categories or the general principles. We begin by identifying the general categories, the categorical headings, the main categorical principles or headings. Block 2, Note 2. The dialectical work of reason to reach the level of concept. In Greek, that is eidos. Remember, Hegel preferred the concepts of the classical Greek period, and that's why if you go back to our summary chart, it's all in the classical Greek concepts, because Hegel preferred the concepts of the classical Greek period. The dialectical work of reason to reach the level of concept, or eidos, idea. We form the differential classifications as this is key, as a scientific system of truth. Hegel tells us that philosophy must be a scientific system of truth. Philosophy is and must be a form of science, as a systematic exposition of the true. Now here you go. This is critical. Block 2, Note 3. We go from the tendency of spiritual substance through the classification of the categories to a systematic formation of all the categories and concepts. This is called actual knowing. The shape of truth must be scientific. Logic is the hypothesis. Essence is the experimental work. Spirit is the repeatable result that completes the systematic scientific approach. Logic is the hypothesis. Essence is the experiment, the essence of the dialectic. Spirit is the repeatable result, a repeatable result. So again, Hegel demands that philosophy must become a form of science, a systematic exposition of the true, a systematic and scientific exposition of the true. Truth becomes the notion of the true as posited in the realm of spirit, expressing the current stage of self-consciousness, and this has transcended the immediacy of consciousness. Essential being is reflected into itself through being posited as an internal externality. In other words, self-consciousness forms its sign model subjectively in the inner self, but then posits it at the edge of objectivity as a filter through which to view the world. So that's key. Essential being is reflected into itself through being a posited internal externality. Underline that, highlight that, put a big star by it. Essential being is reflected into itself through being a posited internal externality, a hinge moment. One side of the hinge is subjectivity, the other side of the hinge is objectivity. It's two sides of the same positing event. Now we're ready for spirit. We've gone through logic or hypothesis. We've gone through essence or the work of dialectic, and now we're ready to go to the repeatable returning result of spirit as also a part of this scientific approach. Let's go to block 3 and take a look at spirit. All right. The third sphere of spirit as the return moment of the whole of life for the self. Spirit is always moving forward, even in its return to the inner self, where it matures into a new shape, a new phronesis mind set. Hegel calls this the return of recognition. When someone recognizes the true that we have posited, they might offer a revision of a concept. They might have some kind of response. We take that, and that becomes the return of recognition that we want to internalize to do additional subjective work. The return of recognition. This is the science of becoming a repeatable result or the duplication of self-consciousness. The whole of life returns into itself and phronesis imprints the mindset as the simple notion of the whole. What is conscience? It is the imprinting. The imprinted conscience is the phronesis mindset of the simple notion of the whole of truth. That is a definition of conscience. It's the mindset of the simple notion of the whole of spiritual truth. 3.3, the simple notion of the whole. We formulate a revised model of categories and concepts as a holistic model of fixed relations. The universal becomes intelligible as here's the key, a scientific completeness in detail. In the preface, Hegel wants to declare and prove and reveal that philosophy must be science. Philosophy must be scientific. Philosophy must be a systematic and scientific exposition of the true. Go to block 2, note 2, C and D. That's your key to this preface. Block 2, note 2, C and D. Philosophy is and must be and must remain a form of science as a systematic exposition of the spiritual true. Philosophy must be a systematic and scientific exposition of the spiritually true. That is your key statement. That is your key axiom to Hegel's preface. That is the foundational axiom to all of Hegel's preface to the Phenomenology. Put a big circle around block 2, note 2, C and D. C and D. So this lesson concludes my seminar on G.W. Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, written in 1807. It's considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest, work of philosophy ever written. Hegel was kind of the modern Plato. And it is a very, very profound work of philosophy. I use the Miller translation. I like the Miller translation. All the paragraphs are numbered, and I think it's a very good translation. So the seminar is based on the Miller translation of the Phenomenology. I have studied the Bailey translation, but I prefer the Miller. We began this seminar with 2 lessons on a composite look at the entire Phenomenology of Spirit, all of the Phenomenology as a complete summary diagram. That is how the seminar began. And if you need a refresher, go back to those first 2 lessons. That is the summary of the entire Phenomenology. And now we conclude with the preface, because Hegel, the last thing that Hegel wrote was the preface to the Phenomenology. So this is the last thing Hegel wrote. The preface to the Phenomenology is the last thing he wrote. So we conclude this seminar with his final teaching, and it's all about block 2, note 2, C and D. In the preface, Hegel is trying to prove that philosophy is and must be a form of science. Phenomenology, specifically, must be a form of science, and phenomenology must be a systematic and scientific exposition of the spiritual true. That's going to wrap up my seminar, my graduate seminar on G.W. Hegel and his phenomenology of spiritual consciousness. Thank you, my friends, for participating in this seminar.